Hey, welcome to another episode of GeekOutdoors.com. And on this particular episode, I wanted to talk about something that's really near and dear to my geek heart, and that would be Linux Mint. Now, for anybody who's watched my channel, they'll know that I'm a Linux lover. I've did a few videos about Linux, specifically Linux Mint. I'm going to go ahead and put those links below in the description if you wanted to see those. But just recently, a few weeks ago, Linux Mint was actually hacked. And there's a lot of stories going around, that the whole phrase of Linux is hacked and so forth. Is it safe or insecure? Okay. Now, for all the details of what this really meant, like some of the technicalities and what this meant to the Linux community as a whole, you could check out this other channel that I really like. His name is Joe Collins, and he does a lot of videos on Linux, and he did this video about a week ago. If you really wanted to know the details of all of this, please go check out his channel. I will also link that below in the description as well. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this specifically and what I'm going to talk about is what it means in a nutshell, but also the difference in terms of responses from the Linux community, specifically the Linux Mint community, and then as opposed to something like Microsoft's Windows or the Apple Mac OS. But I really wanted to focus on this is for more of the people who are not familiar with Linux and Linux Mint. Now, I myself, I've been a user of Linux for about 10 years now. I use it as my main operating system. There is no other operating system that I use. I do have some Windows machines available, but they're very old. And it took me about a few years to completely get away from, Windows in general, and just to understand, when Linux first started in 1991, it was not made for normal people. It's made for real tech heavy nerds and geeks, and so it wasn't very user friendly. But ever since Ubuntu was released and then it got adopted to the masses, when I said the masses, it was more like more noticeable and more prevalent, more known. I mean, let's just put it that way. And then after that, it's a lot easier to use. So it's a lot easier for people to get into Linux. And the one that I myself and many other people love is Linux Mint. It is simply the best way, in my opinion, to get into Linux. And it is based upon Ubuntu, which is still the most popular version of Linux. But getting that out of the way, what I wanted to talk about is what actually happened in general. And then I really wanted to talk about the difference in responses from the Linux Mint community versus, say, for something like that would happen in a Windows or in a Mac environment. Okay, so first and foremost, a few weeks ago on February 20th, the Linux Mint website, which is right here, was actually hacked. Okay, now what happened was these hackers they hacked into the website, and Linux Mint is a WordPress-based website, and what happened was they hacked into it and they were able to change the link direction of where you would download. This is called the ISO. This is where you would actually download the operating system. They changed the links to actually go to somewhere else. And so, and that somewhere else was actually Bulgaria. Okay. And so that happened around February 20th. And here's where I want to get into right away the difference in responses to security related issues when it comes to Linux, specifically Linux Mint. Okay, as soon as this was found and they had some information to actually confirm this, the Linux Mint website and community immediately posted up updates of what happened. So this is from February 21st, and if you actually go through, they're very transparent about what happened right away. And so the lead person here on Linux Mint, his name is Clem, and if you go here, if you look at the team, his name is, I can't pronounce his last name, but he's from France. But these are the primary maintainers of Linux Mint. Okay, and so as soon as this happened and they had some more information, they quickly put up this on the post with all the information that they know in detail. And if you look at right here where all the comments, Clem himself actually responds to all these people who were actually having concerns about this and having questions. Okay, now they did follow this up with two more blog posts as they got more information, telling people exactly what happened and what they did, even up to the final, most recent one right here. Okay. And they explain everything in detail, exactly what happened. Extremely, extremely transparent. Okay. Now, if this were to happen in a Windows environment, okay, as anybody who's ever used Windows, you've probably gotten a virus, spyware, malware before, period, and a lot of times you don't get that transparency. I doubt that you would get that transparency. A lot of times, a security firm or somebody else finds these issues, and then it takes a while for them to get the announcement out and then to get the patches rolling out and so forth. Okay, so that's what you typically get from, whenever you have security issues with Windows. Okay, now for Mac is a very secure operating system. Okay, but no operating system is safe. There's no single one that is 100% safe. And just a few days ago, there was a ransomware that was found to exist on the Mac. Now, they've since taken care of this. Now, Apple does a lot better job with their security measures than does Windows. But at the same time, once again, the transparency is definitely not going to be as transparent as what you would get with Linux, specifically Linux Mint, on what I showed you. Now, the reason that being is because these are very large companies and they are for-profit companies, and they are proprietary operating systems. Okay, whereas Linux is an open source, community-driven operating system. It has been since the beginning, and it will continue to be, which means that the code and everything else is completely available for anyone to see. Okay, now in one case, people might think that's bad, but in another case, this is all community driven. And so there are millions of people around the world who are donating their time and money to work on these very complex projects. Okay, and they're very, very, like I said, I keep going back to the transparency thing. You would not get this type of transparency from either Microsoft Windows or Apple Mac. Okay, and like I said, there are two completely different categories. The Apple brand is very, very important, and they don't want anything to affect that. And the same thing for the Microsoft brand. Okay, but you cannot expect that same level of transparency from these two companies. Okay, so now what does this mean to you as somebody who's thinking of Linux Mint? Well, what this means to you is that Linux itself is extremely, extremely secure. It is the best operating system I have ever used. Out of the 10 years, I've never ever had a single spyware, malware, and so forth ever on Linux. Now, does that mean that it's not possible? No, because there are some out there, but they're very few and far between. And once again, this is community driven. So there's millions of people around the world who are really passionate about Linux. And so these people come together when things go wrong. Okay, whereas if you have a situation with Microsoft or Windows, it's kind of like, well, you kind of have to deal with it, And also, the reason why I really, really love Linux, specifically Linux Mint, is because, Linux gives you freedom. And what I mean by that is it's freedom of choice. Okay. Now, whenever you, get a copy of Windows or Apple Mac, you have to agree to an end user license agreement. Okay. Because you don't own the operating system. Okay. Those companies own the operating system. Whereas Linux Mint and Linux in general, it's not owned by anyone. It's owned by the community. And so, like, for example, a big issue that we had a few months ago and still to this day is Windows 10. They have a lot of insecurity issues as always, but here they're like spying on you. Microsoft always has backdoor access to Windows, no matter which version that you have, and you agree to that whenever you sign up. And now for the Apple Mac, it's something very similar in terms of like when you agree to use their operating system, they have the right to do what they want with the operating system, i.e. they could track information if they wanted to because you agreed to that. And you really have no choice if you want to use their operating system. Okay, so Linux is secure. Now, in terms of what this hack meant, well, and how it affected people, what it meant is that, Linux technology in general is constantly evolving, and you're always going to have these type of issues, especially now on the internet age. Back then, security was more based upon like securing your computers, okay? Because that's where hackers would try to get into, okay? Like that's why you have Windows. It's easy for them to get into because so many people use it, and it has built-in backdoors, which makes it more vulnerable, okay? But nowadays, it really doesn't matter which operating system you're on. Everybody's getting on the internet, and when you're on the internet, it's a free-for-all. If somebody wanted to do damage to you, there is nobody that controls the internet. However, once you are on the internet, the operating system you have is really important in terms of how secure your actual browsing internet experience is going to be. So the more secure your operating system is, the more hurdles that a potential hacker would have to go through to actually damage your specific machine. Okay, now that is pretty much a general of what happened, and the most important thing is the response that they had. Now, going back to the whole Linux security thing, Linux itself did not get hacked, okay? The Linux Mint website was hacked, and who it affected was only a few hundred people. That's actually who it affected, okay? And once again, the response was quick, and it was clear, and it was transparent to everybody who uses Linux Mint, okay? Now, one thing that I wanted to talk about is the Linux security, okay? Not many people know this, okay? But Linux is used every single day by billions of people around the world, and you might not even know it, okay? Let me give you a few examples, okay? So the fastest supercomputers in the world, okay, in the whole world. If you could go to this website called top500.org, what they do is they list the fastest supercomputers in the world. And if you don't want to go here, you could also do a Google search for the fastest supercomputers in the world. And this is the last list that they had from 2015. These are the top sites for November 2015. And the top 2 supercomputers here are from China and the United States. And most of them are from the US. But if you click on the links, you'll notice that each one of these supercomputers, the operating system, Linux. Operating system, Linux. Let's go ahead and choose another one. Let's go to Japan, okay? And you're gonna see like a trend here, okay? Operating system, Linux. There's not a single one of these supercomputers that are running on a Windows operating system or Apple Mac operating system at all, okay? Another thing is your stock exchanges, okay? This news is kind of old, but the New York Stock Exchange, it runs Red Hat Linux for some of its very mission critical enterprise applications. And also, it's not just the New York Stock Exchanges, but also the London Stock Exchange moved to Linux. And a lot of your websites on the internet, they run on Linux underneath, because a lot of websites run on the Apache web server, which is Linux based. And also, the final one that most people would not probably know unless they were in the Geek community is your Android phones, okay? If you go to the Android website and then you go to the security section, you click on get more information, it'll go to source.android.security, and it'll bring up this particular site here. Now, what this talks about is the technical stuff underneath. And guess what it runs on? The Linux kernel, okay? And there's so many other things that Linux runs on, that so many devices, so much software, a lot of things depend on Linux. Now, there is a distinction between the Linux kernel and the Linux operating system. The real term is, it should be the Linux/GNU, because the GNU is actually the graphical user interface, and the kernel is like basically the brains of an operating system, okay? But still, it's all Linux. And the reason I wanted to make this point is because I'm a huge advocate of Linux, specifically Linux Mint. I really feel that a lot of people should look into this as their primary operating system, because it just makes using a computer so much better. I mean, I have not had to deal with like security, malware, constant updates, backdoor access. I love Linux, and it's really hard for me to think of using any other operating system besides that. It's a community-driven operating system. It is free. It's free, which is unbelievable. However, I do donate where I can to the Linux community, but I really feel that I had to make this video because I'm going to continue making any videos that I can about Linux, specifically Linux Mint, if it's going to help people, because it helped me. And I don't really want people to be scared or have misinformation about what actually has occurred if they even read the news. But I just wanted to put it out there and give you also a little more information about Linux in general. So if you had any thoughts about this recent hack on the Linux Mint website, or even Linux being hacked, or security, or anything else related to Linux, please leave your ideas and comments below. Okay, and we'll see you on another episode. Thanks for checking out this episode, and as always, if you like these videos, be sure to click on the subscribe button. And for full written content, audio content, and additional geek stuff, head over to geekoutdoors.com, and I'll see you outdoors on the very next episode.